Welcome to Pacific Unitarian Universalist Church. It's fully spring now. It's the 25th of April. Welcome here. If you'll see a lot of flowers around me, we had a service here for a longtime member, Samuel French. Barbara French has been a regular back up here for a couple months now, and we had all of her family here. It was a beautiful day in tribute to a very impressive man. It was also our first event back on campus of any size, which was exciting too. This is the last virtual or exclusively virtual service we're going to have. We're going to start streaming services that are probably going to not hit your computer until 12:30. It takes a while we can't both record and stream at the same time quite yet. Maybe we will, but think about the streaming next week if you're not going to make it to church, which is open. Coming back on the 1st of May, headed forward, and we're going to have a number of chairs in here. We're going to have about a dozen new members, which is really exciting. I'm going to preach a little sermon about the elevator speech, and it's not going to go perfectly. It's our first time back. I'm trying to tell our filmers that things don't go perfectly all the time. We also have board elections coming up, which we had normally historically in my time here and before, like sort of slated people. But we have a slate of 3 great folks, but in order to be more transparent, we decided that we're going to open it up. So if anybody wants to run for a board position, that's more open. And we're in the middle of really conversations about how to better run this church. COVID sort of threw us for a loop. There's some debates about who should be on endowment, how that all process happens. So just get ready. If you feel like you want to step up to a leadership role, we're going to try to kind of reconfigure a little bit of the committees and stuff as we head forward. Entropy set in a little bit with all of us. It's a pretty light week here on campus in terms of events. This afternoon, I'm on the South Coast Interfaith Council. We're having a Martin Luther King kind of educational legacy series today from 3 to 5. SCIC, or South Coast Interfaith Council, you can jump in on that. We're also starting, not this week, but the following week on Thursday, May 6th in the evening, we're starting our intro class, which is an 11-part series we've condensed to 6 sessions. Tracy Blender is going to be one of our leaders. I'm sure Kim will be on that as well, who's, deftly led us in the last run of it. So we've got 3 different sort of anti-racism workshops that we're going to be spinning through our calendar next year. I wanted to stop and thank these flowers. Steve Schlegel, who is a cymbidium orchid grower of obviously some success, and we also have some beautiful flowers from the French service yesterday. Be worth noting that Naresh, our dutiful Naresh, always or almost always brings in a beautiful set of flowers from his garden, and I almost never mention that, so I wanted to thank Naresh for that today. Okay, time to get to work. I'm going to light our chalice, and the words come from Laura Thompson. Slightly adapted. Across the distance, the light from within me shines, sending love to all. Across the distance, your light warms me as fuel. It helps keep my own light burning. How true is that? At our core, the great truth is we lift up in this sanctuary and in this service and in our denomination is that we are interdependent and connected. We are one more than we are divided in the way we see ourselves. So, together in community, we come keeping the flame bright. Today is a service where you're going to see a lot of videos, but some really good ones. We welcome in Unitarian Universalist, this anti-racist duo of Karin Lynn and Reverend Nancy Palmer Jones. These 2 are the authors of Mistakes and Miracles, which is, I think it's the best sort of anti-racist church-focused book I've ever read. And about 15 of us have pretty much digested this book over the course of the last year. And we're going to offer that in short order coming up in the summer as we head towards the summer. But today we have them. Vivian largely coaxed them into coming on board, and I've worked with them. And you're going to see a call to worship with the 3 of us that we recorded about a week ago. So Karin Lynn is a layperson in the First Parish of Cambridge, where she served in many leadership roles, in particular the ones pushing her church to become more multicultural. It's a classic congregation, sits right in Harvard Square, and what she's doing seems to be working. They've been quite successful. Reverend Nancy Palmer-Jones, NPJ as I like to call her, has come to think of her, that's how I think of her. She's the minister of the San Jose Church, has been for, 18, 20 years now. And she is a long-term activist. She's cultivated anti-racist curriculum for us. She's written, in addition to the book Mistakes and Miracles with Karin, she's written a book called Soul Work, Anti-Racist Theologies and Dialogue. These two have sort of seen it all. Together, this insightful tag team, one a layperson of color and another white female minister, have stopped in their lives to dive deep into 5 UU congregations who've walked this imperfect path forward to being more diverse, the path we're starting to walk now. So, in the vision of making a Unitarian Universalism more representative of the world that exists outside all of our church walls, sadly, almost all of our church walls, and to bring in the beloved community that we've all sort of had in this vague vision, these two are joining us virtually. But it's not any generic mailed-in service. These two have sat, taken time out of their respective lives to sit with us, figure out what it is that we most need to hear. They're going to tell stories, tell their own stories, tell the story of the book. And the book is just this imperfect guide of how different congregations have managed to grow. As they say in Congress, I will defer any remaining time I might have to these two and their presentation later. First, the call to worship video that we put together, starting now.
Our shared call to worship today is the poem River Call by the Reverend Manish Mishra Marzetti from Voices from the Margins. Between rocking the boat and sitting down, between stirring things up and peaceably going along, we find ourselves here in community.
Each called from many different journeys, many different life paths onto this river road.
Some are here because the rocking of the boat has been too much tumult, too much uncertainty, too much pain.
Some are here with questions about where the boat is going, how best to steer it, where this journey ends.
Others are here as lovers of the journey, lovers of life itself.
Here in front, beside, behind, each a passenger, each a captain, doing the best we can.
Rest here in your boat with me, the river calls. Listen to how I flow, the sound of life coursing all around you.
Let the current hold you.
Let the current guide you.
The river that gently flows through your soul whispers, "Come, let us worship."
The river calls us to listen, to feel ourselves held, calls us to be guided by something larger than ourselves. Just as the Spirit calls in this hymn from our Teal hymnal, Singing the Journey. An African-American spiritual, the hymnal says, but also a song used at almost every civil rights era protest to raise the energy and bolster the courage of those fighting for rights, for dignity, and for full humanity. It's a zipper song where the central word can be changed. There's a wonderful version sung by Bernard Lafayette, who was a student activist in the Civil Rights Campaign and then became the leader of the 1968 Poor People's Campaign. And he sings, "I gotta moan when the Spirit says moan. I've gotta sleep when the Spirit says sleep." This version was produced by lay and professional musicians from the First Unitarian Church of San Jose, with Diane Sychek on piano and Bruce Halen, Bev Clifford, Meredy Halen, and John Ector on vocals. In the oral tradition, they will call out the changes and we can sing along from home. Here is When the Spirit Says Do.
You gotta do when the Spirit says do. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do. Oh Lord, you gotta do when the Spirit says do. 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 You gotta sing.
You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you gotta sing. Oh Lord, you gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. 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 Dance. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you gotta dance. Oh Lord, you gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 You gotta laugh.
You've got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. You've got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. When the Spirit says laugh, you've got to laugh, oh Lord. You've got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. 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 You got to do. You got to do when the Spirit says do. You got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you got to do. Oh Lord, you got to do when the Spirit says do. 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 Spirit says do.
I'd like to invite all our children forward to the computer screens soon enough back here, hopefully. And this is a children's moment. You're going to see a book. It's a book by Jelani Memory. It's called A Kid's Book About Racism, simply titled. Enjoy the video.
My name's Jelani Memory, and this is a kid's book about racism. This is a book about racism, for reals, and yes, it really is for kids. It's a good book to read with a grown-up, because you'll have lots to talk about afterward. Just you, keep reading. The book won't bite. Now to introduce myself. My name is Jelani. My skin color looks like this. If you're colorblind, this is the color brown. Because my dad is black and my mom is white, which makes me mixed. Or African American, biracial, black, or a person of color. I'm proud of who I am and the color of my skin, but because of my skin color, people aren't always nice to me. Sometimes I get called names. Other times, it's worse. The person doing it might not even realize that it hurts me a lot. And when they treat me that way, it makes me feel small. You see, some people believe that having different color skin means you aren't as good as others. That's called racism. What is racism? Racism means to hate someone, exclude them, or treat them badly because of their race or the color of their skin. And it happens all the time. Not just in big ways, but sometimes it shows up in small ways, ways that are almost invisible. Like a look, a comment, a question, a thought, a joke, a word, or a belief. Racism is one of the worst kinds of mean someone can be, because racism thinks being different is bad. But being different is actually good. Like really, almost there, I promise. Really good. 1000% good. Because being different means we have so much more to offer each other. Things like help, ideas, strength, skills, creativity, life, patience, respect, community, love, knowledge, experience, perspective, insight, diversity, wisdom, empathy, and originality. That whole being different thing, it makes us better. Much better. So if you see someone being treated badly, made fun of, excluded from playing, or looked down on because of their skin color, call it racism.
Now time for joys and concerns. I'm going to actually start our tradition of having a lot more candles lit than one today. Put some candles out here, and I'm going to just, as a sort of warm up to having people come up and light their own candles, which we will be back at fairly soon. I'm not sure how we're going to do that in terms of like safe logistics, but in spirit we'll be back here anyway. Deb Murphy, one of our newer returnee members, has a sister in harm's way in Mexico, and I want to lift up her concerns and Deb's concerns for her being over the border and in, a dangerous state with cancer. I want to also lift up my dad and my own concerns. My dad is losing his vision and his memory at a rapid rate, and it's I'm headed home this week for about 4 days. It's very disconcerting to myself and my brothers and, of course, my dad. So I ask you to hold me and mine in your thoughts, too. It's Ramadan. I want to lift that up, which is an easily missed sort of holiday that most of us are not Islamic, but, it's a great tradition of about a month of fasting and self-reflection. In Judeo-Christian terms, think of it as sort of the Lent of the Judeo-Christian world, right? So, of the Islamic world, and it's a time for reflection, and we sort of say a little prayer that people find the depth in this month that can come from that kind of sacrifice and that kind of turning yourself inward and towards God. So we think about them. We have members in our congregation who are engaged in legal battles with their kids and spouses and such, and that's a trying, angst-provoking moment for many. We're also applying for a grant. I haven't heard the news about that grant. That news is supposed to be right around the corner, if not already in. And so I want to, this is more of a cross your fingers kind of thing. I hope we can get this grant, and it'll provide us some outreach money for growing our congregation, particularly in a more diverse way, help our RE program as well. Bruce and Tracy have family that are in various states of challenges. Might want to give them a call if you're close to them. They haven't been around campus much. Well, who has? But I want to lift them up too. We have our own Lynn Taylor who's going in for, it seems like, manageable eye surgery around eyelids. Nothing, too intrusive to the eye itself, but, Lynn's up here all the time and working hard for us and one of our own, and we think about her. Lots of stuff, right? More vaccines for people, that's a joy. We have a verdict this last week that I think most of us are pretty happy about, so that's good. We have people whose kids are in the Midwest in, sort of various levels of stress. So, all of us, joys and concerns, we're coming back. I'm going to just light a bunch of candles in spirit of all of those things. So, none in particular for anyone. Just another panorama of fire here for ours and our own. Let's bow our heads, close your eyes, lift up your hearts, find a still spot in whatever way you want to do that. Turn off the video if you want to. Whatever steels you to become the liberated person and agent of positive change you call yourself to be. My prayer begins with a concern that I suspect you feel, that the news of gun violence, racist cop, images of inequality that fall down on color lines almost sadly, predictably, regularly, can make you feel like you're absorbing this stuff like the news is like drinking from a fire hose. I need not tell you that we've been at this sad game a long time. Humans, citizens, particularly the United States, it can be disheartening, and it is hard not to turn away. My prayer is that we don't. And for me, not turning away requires some wisdom and some understanding about what I believe our role is and what we're excused of. Kind of long. The good news is you and I were not there when the original African Americans in this country were kidnapped, soon to be slaves, transported across the seas from Africa. It reassures me that neither you or I were there when the natives, who were not killed in advance by diseases that preceded them, were pushed around and killed. All the indigenous people in North America. I need not tell you that we were not there when the people from across the seas, Irish, Asian, did the dirty jobs and work that many of the white European ancestors who were here before with privilege did not. You didn't enslave slaves or free them or kill the indigenous people of this nation in a lustful westward expansion that brought us to the edge of the coast where we stand today. I likewise didn't fight to die and end slavery, neither did you, and we were not part of the noble efforts that inspired Reconstruction or among the corrupted efforts to hold back and keep the old ways. I and you, we never lynched anyone to create a culture of fear or repression. You're not responsible for that. You were probably not alive for most of that. Rest easy, drop your shoulders. Take a breath. But I do need to tell you that we stand on that legacy both directly and indirectly. And my prayer today is that in the luxury of not having to be responsible for the sins of the past, we not forget that we're part of a culture that inherited those instincts and that legacy, that privilege, really. My prayer is that we own that, and that for those of us who feel like we stand on top of a culture of division, which we do, most of us, that has people of color on the bottom, there should be a tension in your throat. I sadly want to think of myself as a good person, free of the sins, free to sort of have achieved my own achievements. But the truth is, I've benefited from an inequality that is my birthright. My prayer is that I personally and we culturally, with the persistence and the sadness and the humor that will be required, work to pull as courageously as we can muster at the strands of the web of a society we've created that is unjust and racist. Pull at those strands enough until there's room enough for a better one. There were always white eyes that saw and named the horror and shame of our culture. Many of them are religious ancestors in the Unitarian and Universalist tradition. My prayer is that I and we not shy away from the truths of the past, that we tell those stories, we lift up the stories enough that we know that the beloved community is we can't bend time. But we can listen, we can tell the hard truths of who we are, and we can actually sort of stand and even suffer a little bit of our own privilege, hand it back, be allies, to honor the suffering that was before and not accept it as these unacknowledged privileges of the moment. My prayer is that we build a future where the web of civilization that got spun that way gets dismantled, strand by strand. One new learning at a time, one less micro and macro aggression at a time, until the place that we call this country and our home is a place we can rest easy and just in, just like we began in the middle of the prayer there. That's my prayer for me and for us. To build a society we can rest in comfortably, feel good about, without short-circuiting the journey it takes to get there.
My hands are strong enough, they're strong enough, and I'm good enough. My hands are strong enough to give love. I know that my arms are long enough, they're long enough, and I'm good enough. My arms are long enough to give love. I know that my heart is wide enough, it's wide enough, I'm good enough. My heart is wide enough to give love. I know that my light is bright enough, it's bright enough, I'm good enough. My light is bright enough to give love. And my heart is wide enough to give love. I know that my arms are long enough to give love. My hands are strong enough to give love.
We're about to hear a sermon in a few parts. We're going to hear from Karin Lynn. We're going to hear from Nancy Palmer Jones. They're going to tell a little of their own stories. They're going to talk about the power of story. They're going to talk about the power of the Unitarian congregations, and this is going to be very interesting. But I failed to mention the most important part of today's announcements, probably because it was on my mind and sort of assumed. At 11:30, we're going to have a Zoom call that they're going to be on, where we're going to be able to engage with these authors around the very questions that you will hear about in just a few minutes, and the path to building multicultural congregations. So that's the probably most exciting part of today. That's going to begin at 11:30 after the service, so tune in for that, and that's helpful. As I was doing the Joys and Concerns, I just got news that Bruce Lewis's mom died last night, so I'm glad I mentioned that, but I didn't mention the most important details. So let's send our love out to Bruce and Tracy, who've been under it for a while on both sides of their family. Nancy and Karin, take it away.
My hands are strong enough. My arms are long enough. My heart is wide enough. My light is bright enough. And I am good enough. to give love. At the First Unitarian Church of San Jose, we love singer-songwriter Leah Morris, whose song we've just heard. And I love the message of this song, that we are good enough, that we're already strong enough and bright enough and bold enough to give love. It's taken me a long time to feel good enough about my work in anti-racism, good enough about my role in seeing and calling out and breaking down the racism in myself and in my communities. And it's always present because we can't help but breathe it in this culture. Well, let me tell you my story. Growing up in Texas, I had an early sense, a really early sense, that something was wrong about the way people were treated differently because of the color of their skin. But when my friend Everett Fly, he was the only African-American student in the entire school district, when Everett called me in the 3rd grade to ask me to go roller skating with him, and I wasn't allowed to go, I was devastated. Why couldn't I? And how badly had I hurt my friend? I could feel an impenetrable wall come down between Everett and me, limiting our friendship. I didn't understand it. I didn't know what to do about it, but the wrongness of it and the heartbreak would not let me go. I carried guilt about this well into my adulthood. It became the defining story, the encapsulation of all the other instances of racism that I encountered. I probably told that story to too many friends of color in my 20s and 30s, subconsciously, I think, hoping that they would forgive me or absolve me, and that our friendship would finally tear down that wall. But beloveds, it wasn't until I was introduced to the work of anti-racism, the real work of anti-racism in the late 1990s, that my transformation could begin. Only then could I begin to grow into my own full humanity, my aliveness, which I'd felt to be constricted ever since I was a little girl. So why is this work necessary for a white person like me? Because a culture that has done and is still doing everything it can to ensure that one group of people has more power and privilege than another because of their assigned race, that they get, as a whole, better treatment, better jobs, better salaries, better health care, longer life expectancy, less incarceration, more wealth, more protection, and less killing by law enforcement, and less impact of global climate destruction. Because a culture that has been set up to do all of these things from the beginning doesn't allow any of us to be our full selves, that's why I believe we all must do this work. It's only when I, over the course of these last 20 plus years, only when I begin, and I'm continuing to do this, when I begin to really learn the history of this country, when I really see how different my life is from those of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, my friends and people that I don't know, when I truly listen to the clarion call of these wonderful voices from the margins, it's only then that I can connect with the full scope of life as it really is, in all its pain and all its beauty. And then when we're doing this work, as we come alive, then we can work together to make the world, our country, our county, our congregation, what our faith calls them to be. A place where everyone's worth and dignity and beauty is cherished. And a place where this interconnected web shines strong in the certainty that no one is free until everyone is free. I'm just one small part of this huge movement. But I know now that what I can bring in solidarity with others is good enough. And I know now, because I've seen it in my congregation, in the congregations whose stories we share in Mistakes and Miracles, and in so many more congregations who are already on this journey, I know now that what you can bring is good enough, and that every single one of you is needed.
Thank you, Nancy. We learn so much about each other from our stories, and I'm grateful to you for sharing yours. My story, like that of many Unitarian Universalists of color, is one of both heartbreak and joy. Heartbreak because I have experienced tremendous pain from the ways in which our religion falls short of its aspirations. And joy because through that pain, I have learned so much about myself, strengthened my faith, and developed relationships for a lifetime. My husband, Kate, and I walked into our first Unitarian Universalist congregation on the Sunday after 9/11. We wanted to find community, and as a lifelong atheist, I wasn't about to set foot in a church of any other denomination. I had a lot of emotional baggage around organized religion, and the focus on personal theology and freedom of thought appealed to me. We quickly became involved, joining committees and holding leadership positions. The congregation became a cherished community that held us through multiple life transitions, including job changes and the birth of our 2 daughters. When I was elected to the board in 2006, I asked a question that had been puzzling me for quite some time. Why, in a Northern California suburb with so much racial and ethnic diversity, was our congregation still over 90% white? And what might we do to change that? To my great surprise, a number of people bristled at the suggestion that we might do anything to change the makeup of the congregation. Anti-immigrant and anti-Asian comments started surfacing, some spoken directly to my face. My minister was unwilling to address the problem, urging me to cut people some slack. He told me that it could cause more of a problem to call attention to racist remarks than if I simply let them go. I felt betrayed. I had loved this congregation for 6 years, pouring in my time, energy, and financial resources. Now I found that I had only been accepted for my ability to assimilate, and it was a reality I couldn't ignore. I left the congregation, and for 6 months I wandered around in a deep depression, wanting a faith community, but I couldn't find a new place to land. I began to wonder if there was really a place for me in Unitarian Universalism. In the spring of 2009, I attended a national conference on multiracial and multicultural congregations, and it was there that I met several people from First Parish in Cambridge. When I returned home and looked at their website, their commitment to anti-racism and multiculturalism was apparent. I wanted desperately to be a part of this community, but I was on the wrong side of the country. 2 months later, I was recruited for a job in Boston. I flew out a few days before my interview, worshiped at First Parish, and left feeling like I just might find a home there. That fall, I moved 3,000 miles across the country with hopes for a new beginning. It's been 11 years now, and I know I made the right decision. First Parish is a place where they wish me Happy Lunar New Year, and where multiple people reached out to me after the killing of several Asian women in Atlanta. It's a place where there's a People of Color caucus every 2 weeks for us to share joys and difficult moments and offer each other support and friendship. We've held countless discussions on race and racism and called 2 ministers of color. Although we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, the unflagging commitment of the congregation and the strength of our covenant keep me returning week after week. I've come a very long way since that time of heartbreak in my first congregation. With the support of First Parish and UU communities of color, I've carved out a space where I can live into the fullness of all my identities without having to leave a piece of myself at the door. And therein lies the joy. Building a beloved community within a faith that teaches us to embrace our best selves to create a world that is more just and more loving. I dream of a Unitarian Universalism where all people can find a home that is welcoming, nurturing, and a place where they can explore and develop their faiths in the context of their culture. I dream of a Unitarian Universalism that lives up to its highest ideals of equity and compassion. I dream of a Unitarian Universalism where love is so abundant that no one is outside its circle. May we all work to make that dream a reality.
Amen. I share that vision. So, darling, we thought we would share just a couple of questions and share our answers with you at Pacific Unitarian. And my first question is, how do you think our friendship, our relationship has been influenced by our doing this work?
Well, one thing that I suspected before, but certainly came very clear during the writing of Mistakes and Miracles, was that relationships are so central to this work, and relationships that are built on trust. And so I think that knowing that you were engaged in the work of anti-racism made me feel comfortable being able to be vulnerable and sharing all of myself with you, knowing that you were not going to be denying my experience, but that you would honor what I said and believe me, which isn't something that always happens when people from marginalized groups share their experiences. And of course, that vulnerability and that sharing over 5 years has led to us becoming just incredibly close, going through multiple types of life transitions together. But I don't think that would have been possible without that trust that came from me knowing that you were a safe person I could share with.
Yeah, that's been an incredible and important experience. I want to say honor, but I don't want to make it sound, that makes it sound unequal. And I think part of the point is that we get to encounter each other in our full selves. And I thought of two things as you were talking. One was that we went through some really tough experiences together in those interviews at the congregations we visited. We encountered some really, really heartbreaking and hurtful perspectives. And I was able to witness, it was a privilege really to witness the cost for you of those experiences that I would not have picked up on, even with all of the work that I've tried to do to raise my awareness and to be, to have my radar tuned in to the microaggressions and the underlying biases and stuff like this. I probably would have missed it, or I would have diminished its importance. And instead, I got to see the real cost when we Unitarian Universalists haven't done enough work to recognize what we're doing, what we're saying. So there's that. And then the other thing that's really, really important for me is that because I feel I can also trust you to be able to hold me in all my imperfections. So I know that I'm going to make mistakes and either have a sideways wonky idea, a misconception, or maybe even blurt something out that comes from ancient programming, and we can talk it out, and we will talk it out, and we will get past it. And the sense of each other's wholeness feels like such a crucial piece, that just like in what I said in my reflection, I wouldn't be in that place of burgeoning, emerging wholeness if I weren't doing this work and we weren't doing the work together.
You talked, Nancy, about being imperfect, and of course we're all imperfect. And our faith, our universalist faith, tells us that we are loved. We are loved even in that imperfection. And so, on the subject of that faith, I was wondering if you could share the ways in which doing the work of anti-racism and multiculturalism has changed the way you see your faith.
I love that question so much. This focus, this potential of our faith was certainly something that drew me to Unitarian Universalism, but I didn't really know about the specific work of anti-racism until I was a few years in, I was just at the beginning of divinity school. And what's happened for me by doing the work and continuing to deepen my faith is that I realized that I have to be thinking about and experiencing and feeling the truths of the universalism that all are loved. And I actually relate that to the first principle, the worth and dignity and beauty. It was a word they considered using, of all. And that what I do matters. Even the small things matter, have consequences, because we're part of this interconnected web. So if I tug on the web in one direction, it's going to set the whole thing jangling. And my contributing energy towards equity and diversity and inclusion and justice and dismantling what I call white supremacy culture, because it's just the best name that we have right now to describe what we're doing here. That makes all the difference in the world. It calls me to live my faith more deeply and to understand what it means more deeply, to embody it more deeply. But how about you? How's it been for you as a lay member?
Yeah, well, I think for the first few years that I was a Unitarian Universalist, I didn't really think too much about faith. I mean, it was kind of like, oh, here's this place where, I can think about different ideas and that's all great. But after this thing happened in my first congregation, and as I've been continuing to engage in the work of anti-racism and multiculturalism, I really think about what the Reverend Abidjan Amanchi says about how Unitarian Universalists of color have to pin their hopes on the aspirations of this faith rather than the reality. I don't remember if that's the word he used, of the faith. And so in that respect, I feel like sometimes there's a disconnect between who we say we are and who we want to be versus who we are in our imperfection. And so what I've had to do is really develop a sense that my faith is bigger than, any particular practice of it or any particular institution or any particular person. As you know, there were times, really hard times during the writing of Mistakes and Miracles when we witnessed some pretty difficult things happen, that I would start crying and I would start wondering whether or not I could actually stay in Unitarian Universalism. And I feel like the longer I stay in these conversations and the longer I continue to have these relationships of trust, the more I can keep in mind these aspirations and work to push my faith toward everything that I think it can be.
I love that. And I also want to bring up that in my experience, as I observe our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, people of color, Unitarian Universalists expressing our faith in worship services that Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism or DRUM, Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries that I know you belong to, as I observe how the faith is expressed and embodied both by these people and in their worship, I get a deeper sense of who we can really be. And I can see that Unitarian Universalism is that Unitarian Universalism of our aspirations is already beginning to bloom even more. And that gives me hope and direction. So I love all of this. Oh, dear ones at Pacific Unitarian.
Thank you, Nancy and Karin. I was amused looking at the offertory humor and listening to Nancy talk about how our efforts are joyful and good enough. Here's a story about someone whose effort was not good enough. It was someone painting a church steeple, one of those classic church steeples, and they went up and they brought enough paint not to have to come back down to the ground, and they got up there, and as the steeple widened on their way down, she was painting, and she realized she was running out of paint. So she put a little paint thinner in the paint, moved down some more, put a little more paint thinner in the paint, came down to the ground, finished the job. She was cleaning up, looked up, realized that the paint was distinctly thinner and looked different from the bottom to the top. All of a sudden, the sky darkened and a lightning flash came, and there was a thunderclap and a loud booming voice. From the sky, she heard, "Repaint and thin no more." So, give generously to the life and work of this church. I'm going to read our offertory words, affirmation of gratitude. It says, "Let us be grateful when we are able to give, for many do not have that privilege. Let us be grateful for all those who share their gifts, for we are enriched by their giving. And let us also be grateful for our needs, that we may experience the generosity of others in that back and forth dynamic that is life." So give generously if you can to this church and to its mission. And please join us in 5 minutes at the end of the service for the back and forth that's going to take place on Zoom with Nancy and Karin. Thank you.
Our closing words today are from the poem The Call of Something More by the Reverend Marta Valentin. We humans of color have always reached for something more, exercising and building up quite a resilient muscle that is necessary against the many gatekeepers still trying to deter us. Being resilient in the face of dissenting voices is a gift we bring. If the pale center responds to the call for something more, they will turn and face the edges where we are, a rainbow of faces and cultures, engaging in a Unitarian Universalism that breathes love into its very core from our well-worn hearts. They will find us no longer waiting, but creating a Unitarian Universalism of our own for everyone.